Hi, welcome to Tips from Pick Your Stitch, an authorized PFAFF and Viking dealer. Today we're working on the PFAFF Creative Icon, and we're going to talk about the sew-on button foot, and here it is. This foot has a black metal plate on the bottom of it, which is flexible, so that you can slide the button right in between and it holds it in place while you sew it on. It has a plastic retractable thread shank guide that slides back and forth. You can only sew on flat buttons. You can't sew on shank buttons, which is why I avoid shank buttons. What this does is it creates a thread shank so that you have more wiggle room when you're sewing buttons onto thick fabric and you need that extra room in the buttonhole. It pops on just like any other PFAFF foot does. Goes right on like that. The IDT needs to be disengaged or the foot won't go on. It will sew on 4-hole buttons, 2-hole buttons. You're just limited in size to big buttons because this one won't go slide in far enough for the needle to go through the holes. So there is a bit of limitation with that. Something that I learned not too long ago, and I've been sewing a long time, was that the holes on buttons are spaced equally apart. The space between the holes on buttons is the same, whether it's this size button or this size button. That space in between is going to be identical. On the PFAFF, there is a specialty stitch to use with this foot. You could use just a zigzag stitch, but you would have to adjust how wide your zigzag is, and the button stitch is pre-programmed. So let's open the menu for our button stitch. So let's open the menu. We're going to start sewing, and we're going to open the stitch menu, which is here. This is a utility stitch, and we are in utility stitches. And I know that it's in menu 1-3. And it's number 19. When these stitches are not engaged, they're in white. When you touch them and engage them, they turn green. I'm going to hit this stitch and listen for the click. Did you hear that click? It's the feed dogs lowering. This machine is programmed to do it automatically. If your machine is not, then you need to manually lower the feed dogs. Refer to your manual to find out how to do that. Let's close this. Let's see, let's talk about this first. This is your stitch zigzag. If you were doing a zigzag stitch, you could adjust it here as to how far you want it to go back and forth. We're not going to need to touch that. This one tells you how many times it's going to go back and forth. The default is 8, but you can increase it all the way up to 16 times to sew on a more secure button if you think you need to. So we're going to just use the default of 8. Okay, let's close that menu. Up here in the corner are my recommendations, and it recommends that we use a stabilizer of some kind underneath the fabric. This is a piece of tearaway left over from my embroidery, but you could use just a piece of paper. It does help to keep the stitches from pulling together when you're stitching on. Okay, let's sew a button on. Okay, so I have my fabric and I have the stabilizer underneath. Let's layer those together, and we'll insert the button into the slot, and we're going to line up the holes closest to me first and stitch those. This is a 4-hole button, so we're going to have to do it twice. Make sure that shank guide is back. Okay, at this point you want to use your hand wheel to lower to make sure your needle's lined up with the hole, and then we're going to go and stitch. It helps to hold out this thread on the side, and then we're going to Cut our thread. And we're going to slide the button forward to the next 2 holes. Make sure your needle is in the hole. It is. Let's go. Cut the threads. Take it out. I'll just trim that thread off. And there it is, all sewn on. Nice and tight. Let's try one with a thread shank. This is just a 2-hole button. Slide it in there. Line up the holes. Give it a try and make sure your needle's in the right spot, and it is. And then you're going to push that thread shank guide forward. Okay, and hold your thread, and here you go. This might be a spot where you want to increase the times it goes back and forth for a heavier shank. Let's cut the threads. Slide it out. I'll trim that thread out. And see, you've got a shank, so you've got a nice room there for a thick fabric like a wool sport coat. But this one's nice and tight for a blouse or a shirt. So to take this foot off, because it has this bar that goes across the front, you don't want to push it from the back, you want to push it from the front, and it just pops right off. Thanks for being here. I hope you learned something. Bye for now.